Welcome back to the Oppo Files, our podcast series here at American Bridge. Each week we've been taking you state by state, walking you through our opposition research vault to share every extreme thing Republicans on the ballot this year have been saying and doing, and there is a lot. Today we have our season finale before the midterm elections on November 8th, and it's a wild one, Arizona. My name is Kate Demchuk, and I'm Digital Director at American Bridge. And to help me piece together what in the world is going on in the Copper State this election year, I'm joined by two Arizona experts, Jess Floyd, President of American Bridge, and Aiden Johnson, Deputy Press Secretary of Campaigns. Thanks for hopping on, guys. How's it going?
Great. Excited to be here and excited to talk about a state that is both critical to our democracy and no end of crazy Republican candidates out there.
That's for sure. Now, I wanted to start off with a fun Arizona icebreaker. Jess, I know you and I both spend time firsthand in Arizona, so I wanted to see if the three of us together can name the 5 C's of Arizona.
So copper has to start.
Yes.
For sure. And then I think it's cattle, cotton, maybe climate, and citrus.
Yeah, I have been told many times that cactus is not one, despite what people think.
Though it should be.
Yes.
Yeah, make it the 6 C's. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it and talk about why these elections are so important in Arizona. Aiden, Arizona had some really close elections in 2020 and Trump tried to seal it, and that's obviously a theme this year. What have we been seeing so far?
One of the things that we've really noticed is that there's basically 4 election deniers on the ballot right now. And, up and down the ticket, as well as the state ledge level. But you have Kari Lake, who's a governor, running for governor. You have Mark FInchem, who's running for Secretary of State. You have Blake Masters, who's running for Senate. And you have Abe Hamadeh, who's running to be the Attorney General. And all 4 of these candidates were recruited by Donald Trump. And yeah, they're they're complete wackos who have no reason to be anywhere near to close to power, and they're incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I think 538 came out with a piece the other day that said 60% of Americans will have an election denier on the ballot this fall, which is an insane statistic to even think about. But I know that here at Bridge, we're doing our work to fight against this. Jess, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We launched Bridge to Democracy early in this cycle because we saw this trend of election denialism being not on the periphery of where the Republican Party was, but central to not just some candidates, but many candidates' reasons for getting into the election, sort of way that they were communicating and thinking about making the base more enthusiastic, and also setting up a situation where this election is going to have ripple effects if they get elected into office. It's not just about this election. It's not just about the next 2 years. It will determine, particularly in states like Arizona, whether or not there's a path to 270 for a Democrat to win the White House again in 24 and beyond. Because what they're already setting up is an argument against counting all of the ballots. And we've seen in Arizona in particular, this was sort of the fulcrum point and one of the main places where this big lie got started in the 2020 election. It takes a long time to count ballots in Arizona. In 2010, I was on a congressional race, that we didn't know whether or not the candidate had won until Friday. That candidate happened to be Gabby Gifford. She pulled it out. She was one of the bright spots in the 2010 election. But it took us till Friday before we were comfortable declaring victory. And what you saw as a normal course of action to actually count duly cast votes is now being turned on its head by all of the people that Aiden just mentioned, and literally hundreds more across the country. So what we did at American Bridge was say, hey, we are the best at opposition research. That's why we have this podcast. That's why we place literally hundreds of stories talking about how extreme Republican candidates are, where their positions are. But no one really had ever done that at scale for down ballot races. And so when we think about putting our expertise in opposition research, focusing on these election deniers who are explicitly going after offices that matter for election administration and certification, we wanted to make sure that we were shining a light on both their election denialism, but also, and the threat that they pose to democracy, but also all of the other reasons why voters, whether in Arizona or across the country, don't really want them running and making decisions for their day-to-day lives.
I think it's so interesting that this is even a conversation we're having about Arizona too, because they have such a strong history of mail-in voting. Like, I'm from Pennsylvania, we didn't even have mail-in voting until 2020, and we still don't have early in-person voting except for extreme circumstances. But Arizona has perfected this for decades, and now
Yeah.
even looking at what happened in 2020, just the level of distrust being seeded in the process is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, one of the first vanity license plates I saw when I moved to Tucson, Arizona was PEVL, PEVL, which is actually the permanent early voter list. And someone liked voting early so much that they had turned that into their license plate. And obviously he worked in politics, but it is across what is a fairly evenly divided state. It's something that people really appreciate, being able to get their ballot, consider their options, think about who they want to vote for at home, and then be able to mail it in and feel like they knew that their ballot was going to arrive. It's a permanent voting list. That's exactly what it was. Your ballot would just arrive for every election. And the fact that these Republicans are eroding trust in that is really disappointing to see.
Arizona also, to add on to that, it's an older state with an older electorate, a lot of retirees who, maybe they can't make it to the polls. And so mail-in ballot is something that a lot of them really rely on to make sure that their voice is heard.
Yeah, it's definitely become an epidemic in the Republican Party. Nearly every GOP Senate candidate has co-signed this idea that Trump was the rightful winner of the 2020 election. And that brings us to our first candidate spotlight for today, Blake Masters. I know that Blake Masters is an interesting character, but Aiden, give us a rundown on what you've been seeing.
One of the most notable things about Blake Masters is that he has repeatedly used his platform to kind of shill for the financial interests of himself and for his billionaire backers, most notably Peter Thiel, who is this Silicon Valley billionaire, big tech billionaire, who has tried to buy this Senate race for one of his former employees. Thiel has dumped about $20 million into the Arizona Senate race. And I believe we actually have some fun audio that we can listen to that kind of talks about Thiel's involvement in the campaign.
They want to hit me because a billionaire is funding my campaign. And it's like, you guys would love a billionaire to be funding your campaign, but none of them like you, and I think we need more people like this.
None of them like you.
The really concerning thing with Masters is that, because he has all these people trying to buy him the Senate seat, there's a real concern that and he's kind of proven this so far in the primary and the general that, if he is elected to represent Arizona, he's going to represent the interests of his financial backers. You saw this in some ads that he's ran so far, where he talks about, for example, immigration. And in those ads, he actually includes footage of security systems that belong to Peter Thiel. He's, tried to sell Peter Thiel books while on the campaign trail and, offered to give away signed books for $100 campaign donations. He's even offered donors an opportunity to have a dinner with him and Peter Thiel just sitting down together. So it's really scary and really concerning that, somebody like Masters has the opportunity and the chance to win this election and could, possibly do the bidding of his billionaire backers while in Congress.
Yeah, I'm sure Arizonans don't appreciate having their Senate seat bought and paid for. But obviously, one of the other top issues this cycle that we can't get away from is abortion. You know, Lindsey Graham came out and proposed a 15-week national abortion ban. Blake Masters has made clear where he stands on that and that he would support it. But Aiden, why don't you tell us a little bit about his other stances on abortion?
Actually, one of the things that he said during the primary was that abortion is demonic. He has, so he has already signed on to Lindsey Graham's national abortion ban. But he's gone farther than that on a lot of issues. He says that he wants to allow states to ban contraception. He thought that the Griswold decision was, wrongfully decided. And he has just, pushed uh, pushed to the extremes on this issue, issues that are critical to Arizonans.
I think we actually have video of him talking about abortion being demonic as well. Can we play that?
I think Roe v. Wade needs to be repealed yesterday.
The federal government needs to step in.
Bans all abortions. Would you support a similar statute on a national level?
Yeah, it's a religious sacrifice to these people. I think it's demonic.
Jess, what do you think Arizonans have to say about that?
Setting aside just how deeply weird Blake Masters is, though I don't think that that's actually something that should be overlooked. Like, he's not personable. He is not someone who's out there talking to Arizonans in a normal way. The other thing that I would say is he's gone back and said that he personally edited his website to take off references to how just wildly draconian his abortion stances were. So he's out there, and then he's trying to hide it, and doing so by coding his own website, because that's who he is. So setting aside the weirdness there, one of the things that is so special about Arizona and many of the Western states is the inherent sense of community, but also one of personal freedom that permeates the entire political culture. And I think that what you see around the abortion ads and stance is that this is about values. This is about who's making decisions. It's about what the role of government really is. It's not about a procedure. It's not even about healthcare writ large. It's about a value statement on who should be in charge of you. And people in Arizona, they want to be part of their community. They want to be part of this group, but they also really, like, there is an inherent sort of Wild West still there. It is, the land of Tombstone, the town too tough to die. And I think that this is wildly out of step with values across the political spectrum, because that's really inherent to the Arizona political culture, is that you should be allowed to be who you are. And Blake Masters on this issue, when it comes to like privatizing Social Security, which I know we're going to get to next, like, he just doesn't seem to realize that the people of Arizona have certain values, and he's wildly out of step with them.
That's a great way to put it. Since you brought up privatizing Social Security, I think we actually have a video where Blake Masters is talking about doing just that.
We need fresh and innovative thinking, right? Maybe we should privatize Social Security.
Well, look, it's not shocking that someone who basically wants to cater to Wall Street and investors on Wall Street wants to privatize Social Security. That is exactly what would be good for Peter Thiel. It is exactly what would be disastrous for Arizona seniors. And I think that, like, when you think about Arizona, Aiden mentioned it earlier, there are a lot of seniors in Arizona. There are a lot of veterans in Arizona. There are a lot of people, almost 1 million voters in Arizona that are over 65 years old. And that, like, this idea of privatization, taking away something that, Republicans love to call it an entitlement. This is a fund that people have paid into and deserve to be able to rely on. And frankly, like, it shows who Blake Masters is going to listen to when he gets to the Senate, if he's allowed to go there.
And Aiden, I know that Social Security isn't the only thing Blake Masters wants to privatize.
He has talked about proposals that would privatize control over Arizona's water resources. The Colorado River is incredibly important to Arizona. It literally runs through quite possibly the most distinguished national park in all of America, the Grand Canyon. Um, and this is something that will not only raise costs for Arizonans if their water resources are privatized, but it's something that could decimate the Colorado River, which is already at a historic low, and because of Arizona's extreme droughts, and is a real concern at the local level for ranchers, for farmers in the area, and just for everyday Arizonans.
And just to add to that, I mean, water, again, has never been a hyper-partisan issue. It's about how do you make government work to make communities in Arizona be able to live, thrive, for businesses to be able to expand. When you think about what has come together, there are multiple governments across the state working together to think about protecting water resources and making sure that communities are supported with the water that they need. And so the idea that you would privatize it and essentially we're seeing what the results of privatization of different public resources looks like when you look over to Texas. And I don't think anybody wants the Arizona water system to turn into the Texas power grid. And that's essentially what Blake Masters is suggesting we do.
Yeah, that is a terrifying thought to think about. I know that there's another common theme that Republicans are kind of pushing this cycle, the great replacement theory and just general racist comments. Aiden, has Blake Masters waded into this theory at all?
He has, repeatedly used replacement theory rhetoric, which is this white nationalist rhetoric. And he's warned voters of this, made up migrant invasion, which he says is threatening and threatening to, quote unquote, his quotes, change the demographics of our country. And he's doubled down recently on this racist rhetoric and this white nationalist creed. This was something that he originally brought up right in the wake of the shootings that happened in Uvalde and that happened in Buffalo. And it's just disgusting rhetoric.
Now, something we opened this episode with was talking about all the election deniers on the ballot this year. Blake Masters, very obviously one of them. And I think we even have video where he talks about the 2020 election.
I know at one point your website had featured this statement: if we had a free and fair election, President Trump would be sitting in the Oval Office today. That comment no longer sits on your website. Why not?
Well, I still believe it, that's for sure.
So it's pretty clear where he stands. Aiden, has he talked at all about what's going to happen in 2022 and future elections in Arizona?
He has been kind of instigating this unfounded theory that the election will be stolen from him. He recently said that he would need to win 80,000 votes in order to kind of overcome what he believes is, and wrongfully believes, is widespread voter fraud in the November election. He has cast doubt on the upcoming election following 2020's election results. And, he is, again, spreading these conspiracy theories and sowing doubt. And this is hurting the integrity of our elections.
This seems to be a theme with Republicans this year.
Yes, I think two things are important to know, as Aiden said, which is number one, this is a just blatantly false allegation about the 2020 election. And in Arizona especially, there have been audits, there have been investigations, there is no voter fraud. That has been established. And the idea that somebody running for the United States Senate is undermining a past election is problematic. What's even scarier is this trend among Republicans across the country to essentially preempt the voters and try to say that, hey, regardless of the will of the people and what happens 13 days from now as we record this, it doesn't matter because I've decided, and I'm sort of priming the pump for my supporters to believe that the count doesn't matter. It's only my feelings about the count mattering. And I'm not going to necessarily concede the election if I lose. I'm going to say that there's voter fraud lay the groundwork for that now. And frankly, I think that more attention should be paid to the fact that Blake Masters and numerous other candidates are laying the groundwork for them to challenge their own election results if they don't like them. And whether that's Kari Lake, also in Arizona, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or folks like Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, basically saying that regardless of what happens 13 days from now, they're either going to win one way or pretend like they won another.
Yeah, it's insane that it has even become a question that we ask, will you accept the election results? Like, that is where we have come to.
Right, and that not a single one of these election deniers is willing to say, yes, I will accept them. It's, I'm going to win, and I'll accept it if I win, which is simply not what passes for democracy in a country like ours.
Speaking of another election denier on the ballot, Jess, you perfectly mentioned our next candidate spotlight here. Kari Lake, running for governor of Arizona, is one of these Republicans who will only accept the results if she wins. And I think we have a video we can watch.
My question is, will you accept the results of your election in November?
I'm going to win the election and I will accept that result.
If you lose, will you accept that?
I'm going to win the election and I will accept that result.
Yeah, so absolutely terrifying that she will only accept if she wins. Aiden, what do Arizonans think about this?
Kari Lake, just to give some background for folks who might not know who she is, she was a former news anchor in Arizona, who really jumped to the right in recent years to appease Trump and to appease his extremist base. She actually was a donor to Barack Obama in 2008. But then she bought into all these crazy conspiracy theorists, and this is something that has been a focal point of her campaign. She's called Joe Biden an illegitimate president. She's, as we just watched, refused to commit to accepting the results of the election. And she even has fake electors who are working on her campaign and people who have donated to her campaign. So she is really, really scary and a terrifying candidate. If she is to win, she will be somebody who's overseeing the elections in Arizona. And not only does she believe that the 2020 election was rigged against Donald Trump, but she's somebody who said that she's going to make sure that that doesn't happen again in 2024, setting the stage and laying the groundwork to not only change the electoral system in Arizona, but to make sure that no matter what the results are, that Trump can claim victory, and give Republicans and give MAGA Republicans the opportunity to possibly steal the election in 2024.
And after what we saw come about in 2020, it's definitely scary to think about that happening again, either this year or again in 2024. It sounds like Kari Lake would definitely stoke that fire.
Yeah, look, the strength of our democracy should not be contingent on a few Republicans in these states listening to their better angels. And unfortunately, that's sort of how we got by in 2020 and made sure that the properly elected and legitimately elected president was actually seated. What you're seeing from Pennsylvania to Georgia to Arizona, which were 3 states critical to that path to 270 for Joe Biden, are people who are saying not only like, maybe I will, maybe I won't listen to my better angels, but actively saying that they will stand in the way of a duly elected Democrat being seated in the White House. And that is something that cannot stand.
Well, we know that Kari Lake and Blake Masters are 2 peas in a pod on election denial. Aiden, where does Kari Lake stand on abortion access?
Lake has a very extreme view, a very extreme anti-abortion view. She's somebody who supported Arizona's archaic 1864 abortion law, which was put in place before the Civil War. And this law has 0 exceptions for rape or incest. And it actually punishes doctors with jail time for anybody who performs that procedure. She said that she's she supports a stronger total abortion ban. She said that pro-choice women are, quote unquote, brainwashed and she supports, she was one of the first people to come out and say that she would like to see a Texas-style ban targeting doctors put in place in Arizona.
And I think we have video of her talking about pro-choice women that we could watch.
Why are they so determined to keep abortion as a right?
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask.
Is this a cultural malaise, or is this something that they've been brainwashed by?
I think there's
politics?
a lot of brainwashing.
That's crazy. She thinks women have been brainwashed.
At the risk of looking brainwashed myself, I'll just say I don't want many things that were healthcare standards from 1864 to be applied to me today. I don't think that I want, to go into surgery biting down on leather. I don't think that laudanum should be the main treatment for ailments. I when you think of all of these things, I don't think that that should be what governs healthcare decisions today. And so I don't think many Arizonans would want that either. In Arizona, there's like a strong, history of vigilantism in popular culture, but I can guarantee that there aren't a lot of voters who want to see vigilantes going after doctors and women for making their own personal healthcare decisions. And I think this goes again back to the issue of freedom and that is a core value for Arizona voters. This is core and central to Republicans up and down the ticket. They want to take away the ability of patients to make decisions with their doctor. And it has nothing to do with an individual procedure or parameters around that. It's really a question of who's in control. And, we've talked about Pennsylvania on this podcast before, but I think no one has said it more clearly than Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, that really the core Republican tenet right now is that they believe decisions should be made between a doctor, a woman, and local political leaders. And if that's what you want, then you should definitely vote Republican this cycle. But if it sounds like that's a little too crowded for you in terms of your own healthcare decisions, maybe you should think about voting for Democrats in a couple weeks here.
And we're already seeing horror stories come out after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, Texas in particular, women practically dying in order to qualify to get the health care they need. So this isn't even a matter of like personal choice, what have you, your core beliefs. It's a matter of life and death in a lot of these situations.
Part of the success for Republicans for the previous few decades, part of what sort of the Goldwater Republican era was one of smaller government and less government interference. And that was one of the core rationales that appealed to voters. And instead, in a Kari Lake, you have government that's going to be monitoring your healthcare choices, going back to 1860s standards for healthcare, and also thinking about monitoring your own children in their classrooms. And it's this new extreme MAGA Republican agenda that is wildly out of whack with where I think a lot of independents and Republicans even stand. And as a parent, the idea of putting cameras into my kid's classroom feels incredibly invasive. It feels like something totally out of whack with what should happen and completely uncalled for when it comes to what our education system actually needs in a variety of states around the country, Arizona included.
So we talked a little bit earlier about our Bridge to Democracy initiative and watching some of these down ballot races that are key to election administration. With the time we have left, why don't we jump into the Secretary of State candidate running in Arizona, Mark FInchem? Aiden, what do you know about him?
Well, I think one of the most important things for all Arizonans and just anybody paying attention to these election cycles to know about FInchem is that he is actually a self-described oath keeper who was storming the Capitol on January 6th with his fellow oath keepers and a bunch of other insurrectionists. There's actual audio that I think we have where he's arguing with the radio host about this issue, if that's something that we want to listen to.
So you never said that I'm announcing that I'm an oath keeper committed to the exercise of limited constitutional governance, end quote. You never said that.
No.
Okay, so that quote is fake news, too.
Yep.
You never said it. Dozens and dozens of places reported that you said that, and you never said it.
Of course it did.
Okay.
It's fake news, man.
Okay. Just like the fake news that you're spreading every single day that the election was stolen. That's fake news on your part.
Right.
Okay, good. We agree on something. That's fantastic.
You're just a fat denier, man.
I am?
I can't even tell what's going on there.
FInchem is, he's a very strange, and he's certainly a character, but he's also somebody to take very seriously. And he's somebody who is running to be in charge of the elections in Arizona. And this is a guy who thinks that the 2020 election was stolen, similarly to Kari Lake. He's somebody who has said that he wants to, be put in place so that he can clean up, quote unquote, clean up Arizona's electoral system, which just means, rig it for Republicans in the future. And he's somebody who has, categorically denied that Joe Biden had any chance of winning in 2020. And he's somebody who said that if Joe Biden was to win in 2024, that would also be impossible in Arizona.
I think we actually have video of him talking about 2024 too.
Would you ever accept that a Democrat could win Arizona, or do you just not think that's possible?
I have a hard time believing that's possible. Everywhere I go, the vast majority of people still show support for President Trump.
But that might just be because you are going to places where there are supporters of Donald Trump. I mean, maybe you're not speaking at Democratic events.
I don't speak at Democrat. I haven't been invited so far. If I were invited to go speak on election integrity, I would talk until the cows come home.
Is there any chance a Democratic candidate for president can win Arizona in 2024?
No.
I think one of the things that's scariest about a guy like Mark FInchem is that he seems so out of whack and so out of the mainstream and what is normal that it's hard to take him seriously. And I think that we saw that with Donald Trump over and over again, where it was sort of a death by 1,000 cuts, because how could he really say that? And he eroded the sense of what is normal in terms of political discourse in this country. And Mark FInchem does the same thing, whether campaigning with Sandy Hook truthers to saying that Pence had staged a coup against Donald Trump in 2020. But what's really important for voters to understand is that this is a guy who wants to be in charge of a process for counting the most important part of our civic responsibility and duty, and that is how to have your vote counted. And he's saying that actually for him, the job is to make sure that it has no bearing whatsoever. It's just the outcome that he believes should take place. That is all that matters. And we should be scared that these people are out there in states across the country.
A lot of the news that makes the headlines, for example, his crazy conspiracy theorists, whether it's, campaigning with Sandy Hook truth or all that stuff, that itself is disqualifying. But, a lot of the policies that he would introduce, for example, he doesn't believe in mail-in voting. He would get rid of mail-in voting if he is to become Secretary of State. And that's a real issue that's very, very important to Arizonans. And that kind of gets lost in all of these conspiracy theories and, the crazy statement of the day.
It sounds like he doesn't even appreciate the responsibility of the role and how it contributes to our democracy. He's just going to completely change it into whatever he wants, regardless of the will of Arizonans, which is a scary thought.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would actually disagree with on that, Kate, is that I think these guys really appreciate the role. I think they appreciate the role so much that they've decided that this is the way to win. They're no longer making an argument to voters and saying, on the merits of what I believe versus what they believe, you should evaluate us and make your choice. They're saying, let's just skip that step. I'm going to make your choice for you because I've realized how powerful these roles are. And so I think you're right that they are not taking the role seriously from the standpoint of understanding it as an institution worth preserving. But I think they understand very well that where the power lies is for them to be able to rig elections. And that I think we cannot look away from how they are trying to attempt to erode these norms as their only path to power. Because frankly, like as Aiden was saying, all of their actual policy stances, from abortion, as we've talked about, to privatizing Social Security and Medicare, to privatizing water, all of the things we've talked about today are wildly out of step with where voters want. Their political leaders to be. So they've decided it's not even worth making those arguments. Let's just skip a few steps and steal the election.
If these people are put in place in 2024, there's real concerns. But I mean, even in 2022, a lot of their rhetoric, their past rhetoric, is having an impact on this election. In Arizona right now, I know that there's 2 lawsuits that were just filed because of voter intimidation at ballot drop boxes. There's been 6 cases of alleged voter intimidation that have been referred to the DOJ. Those are and that is a direct result of people like Mark FInchem, like Kari Lake, like Blake Masters, sowing doubt in our elections, and trying to convince the Trump base that it was stolen from them, and there's something that they have to do, whether that's storming the Capitol or whether it's intimidating voters at the ballot box.
Clearly, Mark FInchem, all these other Republicans believing in election denial, running for these election administration positions, are terrifying to think about, and that's why our Bridge to Democracy initiative is so important this cycle. That brings us to the end of our final episode of the Oppo Files. We hope you enjoyed this breakdown of everything going on in Arizona, as well as all of our previous episodes this fall. If you want to see more content from American Bridge, including all the ways we're tracking Republicans' every move, be sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube. And while you're at it, make sure you're following American Bridge on all of your favorite social media platforms. They'll be linked in the description below. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Aiden and Jess, for joining me. And don't forget to hold Republicans accountable on November 8th.
At American Bridge, we're holding Republicans accountable. Subscribe and join the fight.